Hi, here we are, first Brainy Books online. I hope you've all had a good summer. I hope you're well rested. I myself have been working very hard for you all summer. I'm reading, I'm moving, I'm doing everything. So we're going to begin. And I chose a fantastic book. Of course, I think it's fantastic. Exit West. Here is Mohsin Hamid, if you see it. I hope you can see it. This is a really, really great book. And the reason that I selected this book to be the first one is it's so timely. You will hear him when you see his interview at Politics and Prose. He wrote it prior to the surge that we've had in the last 2 years of all this, but this subject has been on his mind. But moving along from that, let's just talk a little bit about the class, because I know that you like to go over the first class, everything that we're going to be reading. So, of course, first one is Exit West. The second book, a big contrast. It's called Wintering, and it's by a young American writer named Peter Geye, G-E-Y-E. You have it on your list. I selected it because it's so different from the concept of Exit West. It's set in northern Minnesota, which is an area that most of us realize and think about is pretty remote. And these are people who don't ever want to leave northern Minnesota. It is just a terrific, it's been compared to Call of the Wild or any of that genre. I thought it was great. So that'll be our second book. Third book is by Richard Ford, Between Them, which is nonfiction, his remembrance of his parents' relationship, which is something fascinating to almost all of us. The fourth book, and remember, I can rearrange the order in which they go, so you can't trust me totally. But the fourth book, as it's set now, is Wait Until the Thaw by Alexandra Fuller. She is a woman who grew up in South Africa and wrote 2 excellent autobiographical books about growing up in South Africa. And then she moved to the Montana or Wyoming or one of those places. And this is her first nonfiction book. She became immersed in the history of Native Americans. And so it concerns that. It is a short book, but really interesting, really good. The fifth book you're going to be shaking your heads at, but I wanted to do this. It's a graphic novel. We've never done a graphic novel. We're familiar with graphic novels because of the great one by the New Yorker cartoonist. Name escapes me, but she did it about her dying parents in Brooklyn, and most of us who read it were just bowled over. And that was my real first graphic novel. Now this is called The Arabs of the Future. And there's book 1 and book 2. And I want you to look at both of them. You see, I didn't even say read. I want you to read both of them. Book 1 won the Prix Goncourt in France as the highest prize. I wanted for us to examine about why a graphic book would win this, enormous prize. So that's book 5. Book 6 might surprise you a little. Born a Crime, Trevor Noah, Comedy Channel. He replaced Jon Stewart. He has written a very, very good biography. He grew up in he grew up in South Africa, and this book will rock you when you read about the conditions under which this kid grew up. So I think that will be something. Book 7, my heart is pounding because I love this book so much. I think if you are in Annapolis, you're going to have to get it from the marina. It's hard to get. I am just furious about this. It won the Impact Award, which those of you who have taken the class know is the award given in Dublin, Ireland. It's the richest one. It's the most money. It's a huge amount of money. And this is the award given by librarians for what they think is the best book of the year. A General Theory of Oblivion. It is in Portuguese. Jose Eduardo Agualusa. But of course, we're reading the translated version, and you know we've had a lot of talk, and I'm very big on honoring translators. This translator is Daniel Hahn, and with this Impact Award, they split the award, which they should do. Booker Prize is now moving some of this politics into their award. So, and then finally, A Manual for Cleaning Ladies by Lucia Berlin. It's short stories. As usual with short stories, I caution you, don't read it as a book. Just pick out one or two or three. You can do the first two and the last one, just so you know her style, and we'll be talking about all of them. But it's really bad with short stories to just read from beginning to end, as we've gone on many times about. Okay, so those are the books that we're going to be immersed in, I hope. Very quickly on the awards, because we do follow them. I mean, they are important. Man Booker is coming up. It's in November. It will be awarded, but Exit West is on the long list, and I hope will be on the short list. Something else that we read, Underground Railroad. It's a British prize, of course. They've opened it up to authors who are not living in Great Britain, but the books must be written in English and they must be published and released in England in order to be eligible. That's why you might be wondering if Underground Railroad is a little late, but it just came out in England. Okay, so let's just move on from there. Okay, so now let's go with Exit West. No book ever got a more perfect title than that, because that is exactly what is happening today, as we all know. Exit West, here we are. Mohsin Hamid. He is a Pakistani writer. If you've read it, you will know that we are talking about immigrants, people who leave their country, and immigrants, people who have recently come to a country. These people are immigrants and immigrants. He wanted to make a statement about what's going on in the world now. We may think this is all new. It's not. And by the way, in Brainy Talk, we're going to realize what an old story this is. That's coming next week. However, he selected a Middle Eastern country. He never names anything. He's quite famous for this in all his books. A lot of his characters never have names. But we're going to assume it's Syria. Somebody asked him, and Syria works. In very familiar surroundings with people that we recognize, people like ourselves. They're leading normal, everyday, banal lives. What happens in your country when you're going to school or you're working, you're in your 20s, and suddenly the country starts to fall apart? And these little groups that are protesting on the corners that we're laughing about or saying, oh my God, or we're tearing our hair about, suddenly they start impinging on your daily life. And he takes us through, I would say, the first third of the book. We follow this young couple who are starting to fall in love, starting to have a relationship. And he shows us, this is what happens to your life when this goes on. And this might be a new idea that is meaningful to us. People living in the United States never even contemplated things like this. But in the last year, I think we have understood. Charlottesville, these things are real, and they really, really happen. As a way of starting our discussion, I'm going to read a review from the New Yorker, which is superlative, but I think really caught the heart of the book. So I'm going to read this review and be listening and thinking, and you might want to make notes that you'll put in the comment box. All right, So this is a New Yorker, and the reviewer's name is Jill Tolentino. There is in Exit West constant underlying movement and a sense that intrinsic laws of moral physics are at work. Let me just interrupt to say, you know, if you've read the book, the real laws of physics, he kind of sidesteps with his door thing. But this emphasizes, I mean, I've thought about this emphasizes the intrinsic laws of moral physics are at work. In a recent interview, Hamid noted that the current political paralysis in America and Europe could be attributed, at least partially, to our denial of the reality of mass migration. This is Hamid speaking now. The more that people who are economically freezing and precarious become aware of places where people are economically warmer and more safe, the more they want to move there. We need to figure out how to build a vision for this coming reality that isn't a disaster, that is humane and even inspiring. That's the end of Hamid's quote, and I couldn't agree with him more. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. In Exit West, Hamid rewrites the world as a place thoroughly, gorgeously, and permanently overrun by refugees and migrants. Its boundaries reconfigured so that the only divisions that mattered now were between those who sought the rite of passage and those who would deny them the rite of passage. Hamid does not flinch from the mess and anger that come from redistribution and accommodation, but still he depicts the world as resolutely beautiful and at its core unchanged. I'm not finished yet, because this really is the core of the novel. The novel feels immediately canonical, like written in stone. So firm and unerring is Hamid's understanding of our time and its pressing questions. Whom are we prepared to leave behind in our own pursuit of happiness? Whom are we able to care for? Whom are we willing to care for? And why are our answers to those questions so rarely the same? I mean, this is everything that's going on now. At one point, Said, the character in the book, points out to Nadia, his love in the book, that millions of refugees previously came to their own native country. When there were wars nearby, Nadia replies. That's different. Our country was poor. We didn't feel we had as much to lose. Comfort, she knows, can anesthetize one against concern for others. That's something to think about. When a door leads Nadia to a beautiful house with a fine bathroom, the towels are so plush and fine that when she emerged, she felt like a princess using them, or at least like the daughter of a dictator who was willing to kill without mercy in order for his children to pamper themselves with cotton such as this. Hamid exempts no one from the cruelty that shadows contemporary life. At the end of a long sentence, just before Said and Nadia leave their home country, he writes that, quote, this is from the book, it's a beautiful line, "When we migrate, we murder from our lives those we leave behind." Now, I know that was a very long passage to read, but I think she really caught the absolute heart of this book. Think of all these people. I actually had an Uber driver in Chicago who told me that he had to leave Bosnia years ago, clutching his daughter and carrying in a plastic bag, he was a university professor, in a plastic bag, his passport and the little money he had, and ran. This is what happens. I mean, these things, we all say, this can't happen, it won't happen, it happens. And these are not, just stragglers in the street. These are people who have homes, apartments, children, families. So, Hamid has been thinking about this a long time. His view of all this is it's been going on forever, but there are a couple of changes. There are many more of us now. What was once, say, 1,000 is now 1,000,000. So we've got so many people, in quotes, loose in the world. And they all want to come, for the moment, to Europe is the real thing because of the proximity. And this has caused enormous political consequences. And I hope you're going to be with us in the talk class because we go into that in detail about exactly what has gone on with that. I want to read a passage now from the book, another subject of the book. And this struck me. It was in the very beginning because it's what I was thinking. It might seem odd that in cities teetering at the edge of the abyss, young people still go to class. In this case, an evening class on corporate identity and product branding. But that's the way with things, with cities as with life. One moment, we're pottering about our errands as usual, and the next, we're dying. And our eternally impending ending does not stop with our transient beginnings and middles until the instant it does, the unpredictability of life. You know, I do a lot of research for these classes. I watched a lot of mostly young British women talking about this book. And one of them really struck me, and I just shook my head and found this a ridiculous criticism of the book. She went on and on and on about she was so surprised that an author who's been so honored doesn't know what commas are, periods, run-on sentences that might be a page long. Well, he is known for this. He has been criticized for this. But I think I know why he does this. And if he's watching, he'll let me know that he appreciates that I know. Because when there's a little passage in the book, if you remember somewhere, suddenly a man steps out of his apartment in Amsterdam and looks on the Herengracht or something. And this goes on for a page and a half. And true, there's very few commas, and there's only one period at the end of it. But I think the reason he does this is his language is flowing just beautifully. And I take the pause where I need to take the pause. I don't need a comma to tell me. I took a pause when I wanted to think about, oh, Amsterdam, I know that city, and then I put it in my head, and then I read on. What is he looking at? He allows us to punctuate in our heads. So that is my answer to that young lady in Great Britain. She was very upset about this. How could he be called a great writer? So I'm moving on from that. He is a great writer. Now, I want to talk about him because we have read 2 of his books before, if you were taking the class. He's most well known, of course, for The Reluctant Fundamentalist. They made a film of it. If you want to watch, the film is not very good at all. The book was incredible. It was, for a while, the post-9/11 book, you know, like trying to figure out who are these people and why do they want to kill us, that kind of thing. So that was The Reluctant Fundamentalist. His first book was Moth Smoke. Let me go backwards in his life, because this guy is like the golden boy, born with I don't know what in his mouth, and just, I mean, he has it all. He's charming, he's funny, he's got humor. His father was doing postgraduate work at Stanford, so the whole family moved when he was 3 to Palo Alto, and so was a little kid. He's there. He spent most of his growing up years in California because his father worked there. Then the family went back to Pakistan. He went. Then he wanted to be educated in the United States, went to Princeton. I'm always saying this, but people are recognized early. And he was accepted, he was majoring in English, but he was in literature, but he was accepted into Toni Morrison and Joyce Carol Oates' writing class. And you don't just walk into these classes. You have to be accepted into them. So his first book, Moth Smoke, he's young, 1920, was workshopped in Toni Morrison's class. So she had a hand in it, a guiding hand. By the time he got out of Princeton, this is what I mean. I mean, he's a very smart guy. He knew he had to pay off his student loans. And he had always felt he was going to be a lawyer. So he applied and, of course, was accepted to Harvard Law. Went through law school, but started taking some time off to do some writing. So by the time he got through Harvard Law, Moth Smoke, his first book, was done. He then paid off the student loans. When he got out, he worked for a law firm, which I don't think he liked too much, and then joined McKinsey, the big worldwide consultant. And this is making pretty big bucks. So he is paying off all these loans. He's making good money, and went to London with McKinsey. He left New York and went to London. And he went in August before 9/11. So he got there in August, and September 11th came. So he was in London, working for McKinsey, also writing, but finding out that he had to make an arrangement with McKinsey that he would take 3 months a year off to write, because in his heart of hearts, this is what he really wanted to do. He felt that this was the way he was going to be in the world best. And this he did. And to this day, he doesn't emphasize it too much, but he does consulting work. So just, people always think, oh, these writers, they're so rich because they've made a name for themselves. No. I mean, most of them, I'm always saying this, are teaching at universities. He made, and this is very interesting, I think, about him. He has in this time married and had a little girl, and decided he had sort of a crisis of conscience. I am Pakistani. I am Middle Eastern. I write with my feet planted in that place. Why am I living in London? And he talked with his wife, and they decided they would move back. And so they now live in Lahore. They have moved back to where he grew up. And one reason he said, all these things are interesting, and they tell you a lot about the book. Bought a house right next to his parents, and this is in the tradition of the Middle East, Mediterranean tradition. The parents live there. He lives here with his wife, now 2 children. And the family is interconnected and flowing. And to him, this is essential for his intellectual and emotional well-being. And apply that to Exit West. If you've read it, that'll clink. And if you haven't read it, bear it in mind when you are reading it. He is remarkable. I mean, he's so gifted in so many ways. So that's Hamid, our author today. The theme, really the major theme of this book that he intended was what happens to people when they have to make these huge changes in their lives, when you become really homeless and traveling through all sorts of countries, you don't speak the language. Just think about this. There's an excellent interview with him on PBS, which I hope you will watch after we're finished here, in which he discusses this theme.
Well, I've been moving around my whole life. California, Pakistan, London, New York, Pakistan again. And I wanted to write about the experience of migration. And I also felt this resistance to migrants was growing, and I wanted to write in response to that.
There's also another interview that was done with the Wall Street Journal, which is a must to see.
We think, oh, the refugee or the migrant is, some other kind of thing. But, your life gets interrupted. There you were in whatever city you were in, living the way people live. And all of a sudden, events occur. And it gives a sort of drama to the romance also, in a sense. When we meet somebody and we know we can't be together, it feels incredibly more potent, at least for a while.
Absolutely. And they certainly have a very potent beginning to their relationship.
He wanted to write about a theme, and it is about migration. And the way he handled this very cleverly was, he's interested in what happens to these people after they get there. All we read about usually in the news, of course, are these harrowing journeys across water, in boats sinking, in babies dying. And so he very cleverly brought in, you could say, magical realism, but he just used, if you've read the book, you'll know, this concept of windows. A girl goes into her closet, a window opens up, and she can step then from Greece into London. Because he didn't want to deal with this extremely dramatic part of the migration, getting to the new countries. He's concentrating on what happens to them after they get there, which I have to say, Fire at Sea, the documentary that I showed to the film class, which dealt with exactly this, they showed in that documentary, very briefly, the camp that the Italians built so that all these migrants coming into Lampedusa, which is this big island where they all end up, they built what they felt was a very nice place to hold these people. It's like a holding place until they can figure out how they can be integrated into the country. Now, this has now become almost obsolete. These places, they can't even contain everybody. But this is all another discussion, and I hope you're going to join me in the talk class when we're really going to go into this issue. Now, let's get into what Hamid is concentrating on. What happens to people when they finally make it to some place. I want to read from the book. We are all children who lose our parents. Remember, they're leaving behind everything, and most of these people never go back and they never see their parents again. We are all children who lose our parents, all of us, every man and woman and boy and girl. And we too will all be lost by those who come after us and love us. And this loss unites humanity, unites every human being, the temporary nature of our beingness and our shared sorrow, the heartache we each carry, and yet too often refuse to acknowledge in one another. I've often said in these classes, and I continue to emphasize it, when these authors set out to write a book like this, he is not thinking about the boy, the girl, the names, how they fell. He has a concept in his mind. So he had this concept in his mind. I want to write a book about loss, about what we all lose when we move on. There is another concept in the book that's very important, and he illustrates it towards the end of a book when he describes an old lady who lives in Palo Alto, who's never left Palo Alto. She's lived in this beautiful house. She's raised her children. She got divorced. She's still there. But the world around her has changed so much. And this is another enormous theme, and it's a point that he's trying to make to us. We're all migrants. We have to be. The world will change right around you. I mean, think of the technical revolution that we have all lived to. You either get online, you either email, or you're out of the living world. So living is constantly migrating, constantly making changes. I will say that Hamid, the end of the book, to me, is one of the most beautiful things. He envisions a world where we have risen to the occasion. We've faced reality. We are not all going to have these mansions everywhere. We've got so many people, we've got so many conflicts, and so many people leaving these countries and going to other countries, and there'll be new ones coming. But he envisions a world in which we address this realistically. I want to read you the last quote. When the couple realize that they're not going to go on together. But while fear was part of what kept them together, for those first few months in Marin, in California, more powerful than fear was the desire that each see the other find firmer footing before they let go. These are grown-up people. Relationships come, we grow out of them, but we care about people. They wanted to see each one have firmer footing before they let go. And thus, in the end, their relationship did in some senses come to resemble that of siblings. How often this happens in love of, you end up being more like brother, sister. In that, friendship was the strongest element. And unlike many passions, theirs managed to cool slowly without curdling into its reverse, anger, except intermittently. Of this, in later years, both were glad, and both would also wonder if this meant that they had made a mistake, that if they had but waited and watched, their relationship would have flowered again. And so their memories took on a potential, which is, of course, how our greatest nostalgias are born. This is, to me, a beautiful ending, because he ends this with such respect for humanity. Both these people respect each other, and we also see, really sadly, what they have lost. They have lost these years. We've seen them become new people. She's found love and satisfaction with a woman. He's found love and satisfaction with another woman with another color skin. He's summing up everything. He sees the world coming. And when you see the Politics and Prose interview with him, please listen all the way to the end to the Q&A, which is full of terrific information and interesting people, of course. And they're speculating about what color the people will be in 50 years. And it certainly won't be all white that we know is white now. So the world's changing, and he is giving us a wonderful template in which we can change too. I did finish reading a book that we're not using, but Karl Ove Knausgaard, the Norwegian writer. And I want to close the class with a quote from him. It's why we read. I think it's beautiful. He said, talking about how he read when he got into his father's bookshelf when he was 12 and read something he couldn't really understand. Here's his quote. "I couldn't understand much of Tolstoy's life then, but it didn't really matter. The point is, in reading, the point is to disappear into someone else's life, their world, other places, other times, and then I'm 12 years old again." Karl Ove was absolutely right. We should all be 12 years old. We should all be open with curiosity, entering other people's lives, and reading these absolutely wonderful and enlightening books. Thank you very much for joining me in this class. Next week, I'm just reminding you, Wintering will be the book. We're going to take a total trip from Middle East, immigrants, to northern Minnesota, some people who don't want anything to change and want to stay right there. See you next week. Yeah. So thanks so much for watching. Anything that I referred to or any of the interviews that you want to see, please look down in the video description and you'll be able to connect. I'm definitely hoping you're going to be watching all those things. And most importantly, your comments in the video description. I'm waiting to hear them. I will be answering them, and we'll have a discussion there. See you next week.